The rope bit my wrists, and for the first time in years I was grateful I'd taught myself to breathe without making a sound. The night in Cinder Gulch smelled of coal smoke and old regret. The lamplight leaking through the cracks of the derelict livery shifted like a dying pulse, shadows bending and stretching against the warped walls. I knelt on the dirt floor, wrists bound behind me, the coarse fibers burning grooves into my skin. Around me, Maddox's men laughed too loudly, the kind of laughter men use when they want to bury their own fear beneath cruelty. My silence unnerved them, though they would never admit it. They mistook it for weakness, for resignation, but it was discipline. Silence had been my only companion for years, and now it was the sharpest blade I had left. Colt Maddox stood in the center, boots polished, coat tailored with the arrogance of a man who believed towns belonged to him the way horses belong to their bridles. He unrolled a letter he had taken from me earlier, a paper creased and stained from years of being hidden. His voice dripped with mockery as he read the first line aloud, knowing the words were not meant for any ears but mine. My dearest Sable, if you are reading this, it means I am already gone. The letter was my last tether to a man who was no longer here, my husband, the reason they called me widow. They didn't know its weight, didn't know it was less a keepsake and more a wound folded into paper. That letter was my burden and my anchor, the truth of who I had been and what I had lost. To Maddox it was just leverage, a relic he could twist in his fingers to remind me of what had been stripped away. The room carried the stench of unwashed bodies and spilled whiskey, but beneath it all lingered something colder. Abandonment. The town had left me here just as the city had once left me years ago. In diners where the smell of burnt coffee clung to my hair and silence was the only thing that sat beside me. They had looked at me from behind their curtains tonight, the women pulling their children close, the men avoiding my eyes as Maddox's gang marched me through the street. People always looked away when someone else's suffering became a mirror for their own cowardice. I lowered my gaze to the dirt, focusing on the rhythm of my breath, slow and steady. The Apache knife circle had taught me that silence could be survival, that stillness could be strategy. If you can control your breathing, my teacher once told me, you can control your fear. And if you control your fear, you control the fight. The lesson had been given years ago in the desert, under a sky so vast it threatened to swallow me whole, but tonight it pulsed back through my body with every inhale. Sheriff Pike hovered near the doorway, his badge dulled by compromise, his conscience cracked like the sidewalks of the city I had fled. His eyes met mine once, and I saw in them a flicker of something. Regret, maybe, or the memory of who he might have been if he hadn't bartered his integrity away. He looked away quickly, ashamed. People always did. But beyond him, pressed against the broken glass of a window, I caught sight of Ira Loomis, a boy no older than 12, face streaked with dirt, eyes wide with the kind of terror only children understand. Our eyes locked, and in that single moment, in the wordless exchange of gaze and breath, I made a promise. Not spoken aloud, not written down, but carved inside me with the same permanence as scars. You will not be abandoned. Not by me. Maddox barked an order, and his men hauled me upright, dragging me toward the scaffolding they had built at the edge of town. At dawn, Maddox said, smiling with the ease of a man who thought he had already won. At dawn, the widow learns her place. I let them push me into the street, the rope biting deeper into my wrists, the dust rising in clouds around my knees. But inside me, something older than grief stirred. It was not rage. It was the memory of a blade, the weight of discipline, the quiet defiance of survival. And as the town shutters closed, leaving me framed by darkness and cruelty, I knew the truth. Dawn would not be my end. It would be theirs. I didn't choose silence. I built it rib by rib until it could hold a storm. When Maddox's men shoved me into the storage room to await dawn, I leaned against the beam, closed my eyes, and let memory take me. Because silence wasn't something I was born with, it was something I constructed from wreckage. After my husband's death, the city had swallowed me whole. I remember nights walking streets littered with cracked sidewalks, neon spilling from diners where couples sat in booths laughing under the hum of cheap bulbs, while I sat alone in the corner nursing coffee that grew colder than my resolve. In those glass reflections I caught glimpses of myself, hollow-eyed, faceless, a woman unmoored. Silence had crept into me not as peace but as absence, a shadow filling every corner of my life. I remember the luxury cars sliding past me as I walked under streetlights, their engines whispering lives of privilege I would never touch. I remember scrubbing the penthouses of people whose emptiness was gilded in glass and marble. The echo of my footsteps, a cruel reminder that even wealth could not fill loneliness. Those were years of abandonment, by fate, by family, by the people who promised second chances but gave only forms to fill out and rooms to leave empty. But there was one place that did not try to erase me. A small clinic of second chances tucked between rail yards and dust. There I learned how breath could steady shaking hands, how control could be wrested back from despair. And beyond that clinic in the desert's edge, I met the ones who changed me. The Apache knife circle. They didn't give me fairy tale salvation. They didn't heal my wounds with soft words. They gave me knives. They gave me silence. They gave me discipline that bordered on cruelty but was, in truth, the deepest form of recognition I had ever known. For the first time, someone saw me not as broken but as capable. They taught me to move like smoke, to let silence be the weight that broke my enemies before my blade ever did. They drilled me in the language of knives, not killing for glory but cutting only when necessary, cutting with respect. A knife, my teacher said, is not about ending life. It is about deciding which lives you will allow to continue. I built my silence from those lessons, not as a prison but as armor. My grief became a weapon, honed into edges no one could see. And yet beneath the discipline lay vulnerability I could never quite erase. The girl who had once waited in foster homes for parents who never came. The woman who had whispered forgiveness into mirrors that reflected only scars. Now, with Maddox's rope biting into my skin, I remembered the drills. How to flex a tendon until a knot began to slip. How to slow my breathing until panic became clarity. I could feel the rope's fibers give under pressure, the faintest looseness gathering. But more than that, I remembered the vow I had made in the desert, never to use my silence for vengeance, only for protection. Tonight, that vow would be tested. Because dawn was coming and Maddox believed he was dragging me toward my ending. He was wrong. Dawn would not mark the widow's fall. Dawn would mark the moment the widow vanished, and the knives spoke in her place. A knife only speaks two words, distance and decision. That is what I remind myself as the lamplight flickers against the wall and the rope burns into my wrists. The air smells of rust and oil, and I can hear the faint whistle of the wind outside scraping against the window frame like a warning. My eyes take an inventory without asking, the knot type binding me to the beam, the nail heads pressed in like silent eyes, the jagged shards of glass catching stray light on the floor, and the way the lamplight cuts across the room at an angle sharp enough to feel like another blade. Every detail becomes a weapon, every overlooked object a tool, because survival demands fluency in the language of knives. When I was younger, before the bruises on my past had turned into scars, I thought knives were only for ending something. I thought they meant finality, violence, the kind of decision you can't unmake. But time and loneliness have a way of reshaping symbols, and now I see knives for what they are. Choices made visible, trust held on the edge of steel, distance measured in inches that separate a cut from a caress. Vulnerability is sharper than any blade because it cuts in silence. And sitting here bound, breath slow, I feel both the weight of helplessness and the fragile promise of a second chance pressed into the fibers of rope. Apache drills come back to me in fragments, half-remembered lessons carved into bone. The thumb roll that steadies grip, the breath cadence that disguises timing, the reminder that tendons will always betray armor because they do not lie. These are not grand gestures, but small truths of survival. Movements so minimal they vanish before eyes can register them. Non-telegraphed movement, the only real language of escape. But what matters more than skill is restraint, the ability to cut once and true without waste, without noise. The rule has always been the same. If you must cut, cut once and true. Anything else is betrayal, not just of survival, but of yourself. I lean against the beam, feel the grain of wood against my skin, and test the slack of the rope. There's no room for panic, no room for rage, only recognition. The rope is not an enemy, only a test. I let my wrist pivot slowly, feeling tendon shift, searching for that one angle where resistance loosens. A splinter juts out near my thumb. To someone else it would be a wound waiting to happen, but I see it as a wedge, the quiet ally in an otherwise hostile room. Pressing against it carefully, I wedge it beneath the fibers, each breath steady, each second stretched thin as glass. Rope loosens not with brute force, but with patience, like forgiveness whispered after years of silence. The guards' voices drift into the room. Harlan's swagger is all bravado, his boots hitting the floor with the arrogance of someone who thinks fear is loyalty. Buck, in contrast, reveals himself in nervous flicks of sound, coins rattled in a pocket, throat clearing, fingers tapping against his belt buckle. They are opposites, but both dangerous in different ways. I memorize their rhythms the way I once memorized streetlights in the city where I grew up, counting steps between shadows. Survival, I've learned, is always about patterns. Even loneliness has a pattern if you sit with it long enough. The way cracked sidewalks remember every footstep of those who once walked them. With one hand finally free, I do not leap into action, because action without thought is another form of surrender. Instead, I bind myself again loosely enough to fake helplessness. Vulnerability, when chosen, is another kind of weapon. I have learned that in a world where people leave without explanation, where abandonment echoes louder than promises, sometimes survival means letting others think you are broken while quietly waiting for the right moment to stand. I think of all the times I closed myself off, believing distance was protection, only to realize later that distance was its own kind of prison. Now in this room I am both bound and free, both victim and survivor. It is a strange intimacy I share with these ropes, an intimacy built on the lie of weakness. But then the window shifts, a movement at the edge of lamplight, and I see him again. The boy, Ira, face pale against the night, eyes wide with something that is not fear but recognition. The first cut I make, I realize, will not be for me. It will be for him. because survival is not always about your own skin. Sometimes it is about the unspoken bond with someone who waits for you to return, someone who believes in your resilience when you have stopped believing in it yourself. Ira is that mirror for me, the reflection of the boy I once was, left behind in foster homes, staring out windows at cars that never stopped, waiting for a family that never came. To cut for him is to cut for every missed connection, every letter of truth I never sent, every silent presence I once overlooked. I let the thought of him steady my hands. Vulnerability and resilience, distance and decision, they are not opposites but two sides of the same blade. I know the pain of abandonment, the scars it leaves like old graffiti on the heart. But I also know the possibility of redemption, the quiet transformation that begins the moment you choose not to let the past dictate the final cut. Healing is not dramatic. It is the slow loosening of knots, the unbinding of wrists, the decision to step into trust even when betrayal has been your teacher. Forgiveness, too, is a blade. It cuts away what poisons you, but it requires the courage to bleed first. As I work the rope with deliberate patience, I recall the silence of clinics I once sat in, places of second chances where broken people stitched themselves back together under fluorescent light. Those rooms smelled of antiseptic and hope, a strange mixture that taught me resilience is not loud, it is quiet. It is found in the courage to show up again, to risk connection, to risk the slow building of a bond with someone who sees your hidden pain and doesn't turn away. That is the kind of bond I feel forming in the glances with Ira, though he has never spoken to me. An unspoken connection, fragile but real, like a knife balanced perfectly on the edge of decision. The rope loosens further, slipping like memory. I keep my breaths even, never rushing, because I have learned that urgency is the enemy of truth. Every moment of stillness carries weight. Every silence is a presence of its own. There are no fairy tale rescues here, no love written in grand gestures. Only trust earned slowly, like water carving through stone, like footsteps echoing down cracked sidewalks. The intimacy lies not in what is said, but in what is endured together, in the silent understanding that both of us, me bound in here, him watching from out there, are carrying scars that ache for recognition. When the final strand frays beneath my wrist, I do not pull free just yet. Instead, I look once more at the window, at Ira's shadowed figure, and I know that survival is not enough. Redemption waits in the choice to act for more than yourself. Vulnerability, resilience, forgiveness, recognition, second chances. All of them converge here in this room of lamplight and glass shards, in the slow pivot from hidden pain to personal growth. The knife's language is clear, distance and decision. But I hear another word whispered in the silence, unspoken yet undeniable: connection. I rebind loosely, hands poised, waiting for Harlan's swagger to bring him too close, for Buck's nervous flicks to give away his distraction. I am patient because I must be. The first cut is promised, and it will not be wasted. It will not be for me. It will be for the boy at the window, for the fractured town outside, for the sheriff whose loyalty is about to shatter. And as the lamplight bends against the wall, I prepare myself for what comes next. The revelation that the town itself has been complicit all along, and that survival means confronting not just ropes and guards, but the fracture at the heart of power itself. Cruelty needs an audience. Cowardice supplies one. Those words press themselves into my chest as I step into the open square, the town gathered like a congregation for a sermon that no one dares to interrupt. Cinder Gulch breathes complicity not through shouts or cheers, but through shutters half closed and faces quarter brave. It is a theater of silence where every man and woman rehearses their alibi by pretending they are not watching. Yet their eyes betray them. I feel their gaze on my skin like water filling my lungs. And I realize that drowning does not always happen in rivers. It happens in towns like this where cowardice turns absence into its own kind of cruelty. The square is a study in vacancy. The cracked sidewalks bear the weight of boots that refuse to march toward truth. Street lamps flicker above, their light unsteady as if even electricity resists illuminating cowardice. Windows are half drawn, not shut completely because the people here want to see without being seen. Their fear is its own form of devotion. Devotion to survival, devotion to silence, devotion to Maddox, the man whose shadow owns them all. These are not strangers to abandonment. They have been abandoned by their own courage long before they abandoned me. Their faces remind me of the foster homes where I once lived, rooms filled with people who offered shelter but not recognition, warmth but never intimacy. It was then I first learned that loneliness does not come from absence, but from presence without connection. Tonight I feel that lesson again, heavier than the ropes that already await me. Sheriff Pike stands among them, his badge still pinned but dulled to nothing more than a coin lost in the dirt. His story is written in the tremor of his hands and the way his eyes drift toward the ground. There was a time when he might have chosen differently, but debts became chains, and the grave of his daughter hardened into the boundary of his heart. That night he stopped choosing was the night the town stopped believing in justice. His fracture is not just a personal wound. It is the echo that resounds through every silent bystander here. I see in him the same kind of abandonment I once carried, the moment when grief becomes too heavy to lift, so you let it settle into your bones, telling yourself it is survival when it is only surrender. Pike does not raise his voice now, he doesn't need to. His silence speaks louder than words, and it says, I chose the town's cowardice over my own courage, and it has been killing me ever since. But the cowardice here is not faceless. It wears Maddox's grin like a crown. Maddox owns more than freight, more than cards, more than the preacher's mortgage. He owns the quiet tremors of every man who owes him a debt, the bowed heads of women who cannot afford to defy him, the church bells that ring only because he allows them. Fear is his currency, and the town pays him daily. I have seen luxury cars roll in from the city, polished and gleaming, carrying men in pressed suits to his games while children played barefoot in the dust outside, their laughter muted by hunger. Maddox turned this town into a ledger, every name written in red ink, every soul mortgaged against silence. And yet tonight, as he drags me toward the scaffold, I see him not as invincible, but as a man desperate for an audience. Cruelty, after all, is meaningless without someone to witness it. He needs them to watch, because if no one watches, his power becomes a hollow performance. I stare at each onlooker as I pass, not with rage, but with the quiet weight of indictment. My silence becomes a mirror, forcing them to see, themselves reflected in my bruises, my scars, my endurance. Vulnerability is my blade here, sharper than any knife because it strips away their excuses. I let them see the resilience carved into me by years of loneliness, by sidewalks cracked under my shoes as I searched for belonging, by clinics where second chances were offered in sterile rooms where no one remembered your name. They flinch beneath my gaze, not because I accuse them aloud, but because they know my silence speaks the truth they refuse to voice. Every step I take is not just survival. It is a demand for recognition. And recognition, once granted, cannot be buried again. Inside my boot, pressed against my ankle like a hidden ember, rests the widow's ring. A small circle of metal heavy with meaning, heavier with the forgiveness I never earned. It is the vow I failed to keep, the promise I abandoned when I chose survival over love. And yet, carrying it now, I feel its weight not as condemnation but as possibility. Forgiveness may remain unfinished, but unfinished does not mean impossible. That ring is my reminder that healing does not erase scars. It teaches you to live with them. To carry it is to admit that redemption is never neat, never clean, never complete. It is a bond as quiet as unspoken connection, fragile yet enduring, waiting for the courage to be claimed. When Pike finally approaches me, his steps hesitant, his eyes avoiding mine, he leans in just close enough for a whisper. His voice is hoarse, fractured, the sound of a man who once believed in justice but has buried it under fear. He tells me not to resist, not to make this worse than it already is. His words are a warning, but I hear in them something else. Longing. He longs for a different version of himself, one that would have stood beside me instead of against me. I do not answer with words. Instead, I meet his gaze, forcing him to see the reflection he has been avoiding. My look is a mirror, and in it he sees both the man he once was and the man he has allowed himself to become. For a heartbeat, the silence between us feels like confession, like recognition, like forgiveness offered and refused in the same breath. Emotional intimacy does not always come through touch or words. It comes in the unbearable weight of unspoken connection. The sky begins to pale at the edges, dawn brushing its first colors across the horizon. Maddox grips my arm tighter, dragging me toward the scaffold that waits in the center of the square. The rope hangs like a question no one dares to answer, swaying slightly in the morning breeze. The town holds its breath, caught between relief that it is not them and guilt that it is me. I think of Ira then, the boy at the window, eyes wide with the kind of faith the town lost long ago. For him, the silence of this town is not yet final. For him, survival might still mean transformation, a second chance carved from the ruins of fear. I feel his gaze on me even here, as if distance cannot weaken the bond we share. And so, as Maddox pulls me forward, as the town gathers tighter, as the rope swings closer, I understand that cruelty thrives only as long as cowardice sustains it. The scaffold may rise before me, but the indictment is not against me. It is against them, all of them, who chose silence over recognition, distance over trust, fear over resilience. My steps are steady not because I do not fear death, but because I know that drowning in silence is worse than the noose. The square tightens. The sun lifts higher. The scaffold creaks. Maddox smiles, and in that moment I feel the story pivot, the fracture widening, the bond between silence and cruelty beginning to splinter. Because dawn does not just bring an end, it brings exposure, and exposure demands reckoning. The rope waits, but so does the choice. The town has watched me drown. Now they will have to watch what I become when air finally fills my lungs again. Colin Maddox drags me toward the street scaffold. Dawn approaches bargaining with a noose. Men who love spectacle forget that ropes fail and eyes remember. That is the thought that steadies me as Maddox orchestrates the square like a theater director, his cruelty dressed up as ceremony. The scaffold looms above me, its boards creaking, the rope swaying slightly in the morning air. He wants this to be more than an execution. He wants it to be a lesson, a fracture etched into the town's memory so deep they never dare lift their eyes again. Every silence, every shudder, every half-brave face will carry the weight of this performance. He believes fear will bind them tighter than any rope ever could. But ropes are fragile things. They fray under strain, they weaken under weather, they betray those who place too much trust in spectacle. I test the beam's flex beneath me with the subtle weight of my stance. Feel the fibers bite into my throat and wrists. Measure the wind's tug on the hanging coil. Physics is a blade too, sharp enough if wielded with patience. I have learned that survival often means listening to forces others ignore. The way silence carries weight, the way tension hums in wood, the way every material longs to give under pressure. Maddox believes this rope is his guarantee. I already know it will become his undoing. The crowd gathers below, their cowardice disguised as curiosity. I offer Maddox what he thinks he cannot resist. My cash box hidden beyond town limits. My deed to land others would kill for. My promise of silence if he spares me. Each offer is deliberate, measured, the way a gambler antes chips to bait a bigger game. But Maddox refuses. He doesn't care for cash or land. He doesn't even care for silence. He wants the letter. The truth I carry, the words that fracture his grip. And he wants the lesson my death would teach. In his mind, I am not a man. I am an exhibit. He needs me to hang so the town learns to bow deeper, to look away faster, to keep their voices swallowed. Cruelty is empty unless it is remembered. As he speaks, my eyes catch what my heart already feared. Ira stands at the edge of the crowd, small shoulders stiff, eyes wide, the rope reflected in his pupils. Maddox has positioned him perfectly, not to save me, but to break me. He knows I carry rage, knows I carry scars that bleed at the thought of children abandoned to silence. He wants me to crack, to thrash, to lose the cold edge of survival. But rage must stay cold. I force my breath into rhythm, the same cadence the Apache drills once taught me, because only control keeps a blade sharp. Ira cannot become my weakness. He must remain my anchor, the reflection that steadies my hand when everything around me demands chaos. Pike lingers near the scaffold, torn in ways the town does not see. His badge glints faintly, a reminder of what he once believed in, though the fracture in him runs deeper than the wood beneath my feet. I catch his eyes, and in silence I signal one step left when I drop, a single gesture nearly invisible but enough. Vulnerability has its language, and trust, however reluctant, can be built even in moments like this. He understands, though his expression does not change. The distance between us has been built on years of compromise and cowardice. But in this sliver of silence we share an unspoken bond. Survival sometimes requires intimacy born not of love, but of necessity. Maddox gives the order. The rope tightens. The beam groans. For a heartbeat I feel the noose bite, taste the edge of surrender, and then I let the plan unfold. My weight snaps the knot, the rope splitting under calculated strain, fibers breaking like brittle promises. The beam cracks, the scaffold shakes, and instead of dangling, I fall. But falls are only failures if you let them be. I twist, roll, absorb the impact, turning collapse into opportunity. In the chaos, my boot scrapes free the hidden knife, the widow's ring cold against my ankle as I draw. Metal kisses rope, fibers surrender, and my wrists are mine again. The first ruffian lunges, shock still slowing his reaction. I move not with fury, but with precision. The knife finds the seam behind his hamstring, tendon parting like thread, his weight collapsing beneath him. He falls screaming, and the sound cuts through the crowd louder than any sermon Maddox intended. Harlan's swagger falters, his eyes wide at the impossibility of the moment. Buck, panicked, draws too fast, firing wild, his bullets shattering glass and sending the crowd into a frenzy of ducking bodies and half-choked cries. The square fractures, cowardice scrambling, cruelty unraveling, silence shattering into noise. I keep moving, not lingering, not gloating. Rage remains cold, steady, purposeful. My blade flickers only when necessary, carving space not for revenge but for escape. The town may have gathered to watch me drown, but now they will remember something else. The man who slipped the rope, who turned spectacle into shame, who refused to die in silence. Every pair of eyes that meets mine will carry that memory, no matter how tightly they shut their shutters tonight. Eyes remember what cowardice begs them to forget. Smoke erupts as lanterns overturn, confusion spreading faster than Maddox can control. I use it, vanishing into the alleys where shadows cloak me like old allies. Behind me, voices shout, boots thunder, fear bleeds into anger. The hunt begins. But I am not prey, not anymore. I am the first fracture in Maddox's spectacle, the living proof that ropes fail, that cruelty cracks, that silence cannot contain memory forever. The town has seen me rise from the scaffold. The boy has seen me survive the rope. Maddox has seen his spectacle crumble. And now, as I slip into smoke and shadow, the next chapter begins, not escape for its own sake, but the first cut, a warning written in blood and silence. I vanish into alley smoke. Hunt begins. Mercy is a blade sheathed in choice. That is the rule I remember as the town exhales its panic in the wake of the scaffold collapse. I move through its alleys like a shadow, carrying no triumph in my lungs, only the cold rhythm of survival and the weight of every eye that had expected me to die. Maddox thinks he commands fear, but fear is fragile when memory begins to contradict the story it has been forced to swallow. One fracture is all it takes. My task now is not slaughter, it is to make that fracture widen, to unravel Maddox's narrative thread by thread until the town no longer believes in it. The tannery reeks of hides and lie, steam clinging to the rafters like ghosts of beasts long-skinned. Buck stumbles in first, nerves betraying him. He is young, clumsy with the weight of the gun in his hand, his eyes flicking corners instead of fixing on shadows. I wait, still, patient, until the moment he steps past me. Then I move, not with rage, not with bloodlust, but with deliberate mercy. My blade flashes, not across flesh, but through the leather belt that holds his trousers. He jerks back in shock as the weight drops, humiliation burning hotter than any wound. He scrambles, fumbling to hold dignity in his hands, and in that instant his authority collapses. I let him live, not because he deserves it, but because sparing him wounds Maddox more deeply than killing him ever could. Gore silences the town, but humiliation makes it whisper, and whispers, if seated right, turn into panic. Outside, I leave my mark, chalk scraped across doorframes, stark in its simplicity. A single line, deliberate, unmistakable. I'm counting you. The message is not for Maddox alone, but for everyone who has convinced themselves their silence is safety. It tells them that eyes are watching, that numbers matter, that complicity will not remain invisible. Each mark is a reminder that the story Maddox told, that he owns them body and soul, is beginning to crack. Fear grows teeth when it realizes it has been counted. Panic is the seed I plant, not through carnage but through suggestion. At Maddox's wagon, I leave a different gift. A note, its blade not in ink but in its certainty. Leave the boy. Leave by sundown. The words are brief, but brevity is its own kind of violence. Maddox will read it aloud, scoff, but the note will gnaw at him. It will unmake his swagger in private moments. It will whisper in his mind while he pretends to command. He will rage not because of the threat itself, but because it dares to dictate terms. And rage, I know from training, is weakness. My mentors taught me the truth of combat. To win, You must break the story your enemy tells about himself. Maddox tells the town he is unshakable, invincible, inevitable. My note tells him otherwise. I don't need to kill him yet. I need to kill his myth. Meanwhile, another fracture begins. Small, fragile but real. Sheriff Pike makes his first choice against silence. He does not declare it, he does not march into the square, but he moves with a splinter of courage all the same. He takes Ira, the boy whose wide eyes have become my anchor, and hides him in the jail's crawl space. It is not much, not yet, but it is something. The man who has long chosen cowardice now risks a sliver of rebellion. It may look small to others, but to me it is a mirror. The first reflection of courage that had once died in him, flickering alive again. The boy is not safe, not truly, but he is hidden. And in that hiding, Pike has declared, if only in silence, that Ira matters. Sometimes intimacy is not in words or embraces, but in the quiet choice to protect someone when no one else dares to. I return to sabotage because survival demands precision. Maddox's rifle elevator, a device that should deliver efficiency and control, becomes my target. I jam it with splinters and oil, turning his advantage into betrayal. Weapons do not need to be feared if they fail at the moment of need. Sabotage is cleaner than slaughter, quieter than war, and far more effective. I learned long ago that survival is not about how much you can kill, but how much you can deny your enemy the story he wants to tell. Maddox wants thunder. I will give him silence. He wants blood. I will give him failure. Mercy is not weakness. Mercy is strategy, but mercy does not mean safety. As I move through the square, leaving shadows behind, Maddox finds something I had not intended to lose. My ring, the widow's ring, the symbol of unfinished vows and the forgiveness I still carry like a wound. It must have slipped free in the chaos of the scaffold, fallen from where I kept it pressed against my ankle like an ember. He holds it now, his grin twisting with recognition. He does not know the story behind it, not yet, but he knows it matters. And in his hands, everything becomes a weapon. He raises it high, promising the town that he will break my silence not with bullets, not with ropes, but with exposure. He vows to make me confess publicly, to strip me of the secrets that keep me anchored, to turn my own silence into a spectacle. It is his counter-move, the story he now tries to spin, that even my silence can be bent, that nothing is sacred, that everything I carry will be dragged into his theater of cruelty. And as the town gathers again under the shadow of his words, I feel the fracture deepen. The first cut has been made. It was not into flesh, but into the story Maddox tells of himself, into the silence the town has tried to keep, into the cowardice that once drowned me. Mercy has been my weapon, choice my blade. But now Maddox holds my ring, and with it a piece of my unfinished forgiveness. The hunt will not just be for my body, it will be for my truth. Maddox finds my ring, vows to break my silence publicly. Grief taught me to move. Purpose taught me where. Those words echo inside me as the night cracks open into a chase that feels more like ritual than combat. The rail graveyard stretches out in rust and ruin, boxcars stacked like coffins of steel, their doors forever sealed, their iron teeth waiting to bite those who stumble. Lantern light swings from Maddox's riders as they spread out, siren wails in their throats rather than on their wagons, a chorus meant to draw fear into marrow. The night is no longer silent. It sings with the pursuit of men who believe they already own my end. But grief has already taken me farther than death ever could, and purpose is the compass I will not release. The ground smells of oil and iron dust, my boots sliding over old tracks as I guide them where I want them to follow. The graveyard is not a maze. It is a stage, and I know its corners better than they ever will. I set the loop trap with chain and grease, my hands moving by memory rather than thought. When Harlan barrels into the dark, full of swagger, still unshaken by the chaos before, he doesn't see it. The chain catches, tightens, and in one blink he is on the ground, leg twisted, bone not shattered but bent toward ruin. His cry cuts the night, sharp enough to scatter crows from rusted roofs. Yet I do not finish him. He is alive, humiliated, wounded, and his broken swagger will ripple louder than his corpse ever could. Mercy is the sharper blade tonight because it fractures faith in Maddox's pack. But mercy is never only for others, it circles back, demanding recognition of what you carry inside. As Harlan writhes in pain, I am pulled backward into memory. The knife circle drills in the moonlight, the gleam of steel catching laughter instead of screams. Those were nights when discipline carved strength into us, but always with a gentleness after, the recognition that skill without humanity rots the soul. We practiced rolls, pivots, breath cadence, but we also learned to laugh under the stars, to share bread after bruises, to stitch wounds not only in flesh but in spirit. That memory is not indulgence, it is anchor. It reminds me that what separates survival from savagery is the presence of humanity behind the skill. Without that, all we do is become Maddox in another mask. Chaos swirls again, steel groaning under boots and gunfire sparking against boxcar walls. In the flurry, my hands find the satchel slung at Maddox's side. It happens in silence. One breath, one cut of strap, and the satchel slides into my grasp. I move without pausing, vanishing into the ribs of the graveyard, the letter pressed against my chest like a second pulse. But when I unfold it in shadow, my lung sees not from running but from recognition. The words are not about me, they are about him, my husband. The page bleeds with truths I had buried under years of distance and denial. He was not the man I thought he was. His signature appears alongside Maddox's freight runs, names of towns, shipments, debts, the double life scrawled in ink I cannot deny. I had built my memory of him on vows whispered in small rooms, on the ring that still presses cold against my ankle. I carried him as symbol, as unfinished forgiveness, as anchor to a promise broken by death. And now, this letter tells me he was not only mine. He belonged to Maddox's network, stitched into the same fabric of cruelty I have been cutting against. My grief was not only grief, it was blindness. The man I loved was not the man I buried. The letter is a mirror, cracked and unkind, forcing me to see the intimacy I thought I knew dissolve into unspoken lies. Yet even in betrayal, I feel the ache of resilience tugging at me. Love, even when fractured, is not erased. What hurts is not only abandonment but recognition. That I loved a man who lived a double. Truth, forgiveness will not come swiftly, but in this moment, survival is learning to carry the scar without letting it own me. Redemption does not mean rewriting the past. It means refusing to let the past close my future. I tuck the letter against my skin, its weight heavier than any knife. Choices are demanded of me, and I return to Harlan, still groaning on the gravel, his hands clawing at useless air. I could end him now, quick and final, but I don't. I choose mercy again, though it costs me time. His eyes widen, confusion spilling through pain. He does not understand why I leave him breathing, why I turn my back. He does not see that mercy is its own warning, that sparing him carves deeper fear into the pack than blood ever could. But I see it clearly. Every man Maddox commands will wonder now if they are counted or spared, if the knife will find them or pass them. Doubt will seed itself in their marrow. And then the sound that guts me, The voice of Maddox, sharp as a crow's cry, carrying across the rail graveyard. He has Ira. The boy's small form dragged into the circle of lantern light, his silence heavy, his fear hidden but present in the way he stiffens. My mercy for Harlan cost me those breaths, that chance to reach Ira first. I feel the fracture crack inside me, the balance between forgiveness and failure, between second chance and stolen chance. The choice I made not to kill is the choice that gives Maddox time to seize the boy. Mercy is never clean. It is always tangled in consequence. Lantern light swings wider, voices sharpen, and I fade back into the shadows. The letter against my chest burns, the boy's figure sears into my sight, and Maddox's laughter carries like a vow of ruin. The graveyard becomes a stage again, but now the performance belongs to him. He believes the boy is leverage, that my silence can be stripped away by threat alone. But he forgets that I have already survived grief, betrayal, abandonment. He forgets that mercy, even when it costs me, is still a choice. And choices are blades that cut deeper than ropes. The chase does not end here. The hunt has shifted. And as I vanish deeper into the boneyard, I know the next truth waits in the name I buried. The one I will be forced to speak when silence is no longer enough. I choose not to kill Harlan. Mercy costs time. I hear Maddox take Ira. Some letters weigh more than iron. I whisper it as if speaking aloud will soften the weight pressed into my chest. The letter shakes in my hand, but I do not read it directly. Instead, I hold it against the reflection of a shattered mirror propped against the wall of an abandoned boxcar, so that every word filters through the broken glass before it enters me. I cannot look at the truth straight on. I must let the cracks carry it first, as though the mirror knows better than I how to reveal what I buried. My own face peers back at me in fragments, scarred and divided, but this time, the fragments feel honest. This is who I am, wounded, split, but still seeing. His confession bleeds in ink, my husband's voice resurrected in handwriting that trembles even after all these years. He admits what I feared when I first saw the signatures. He aided Maddox, carried freight that wasn't clean, signed papers that turned into debts for others, and played a role in the network of fear I now fight against. He thought it was survival, thought it was just another way to keep us afloat. But survival bought with silence is complicity. And when he balked, when he hesitated to go further, Maddox arranged the accident. My widowhood was not fate. It was execution disguised as tragedy. I collapse against the mirror, shards biting through cloth into my back, and for a long moment I cannot breathe. I see myself as I have been for years. A woman in love with a ghost, holding on to promises whispered by a liar. I had built my vow around an illusion, carried a ring as though it still bore truth. My loneliness, my grief, my vows, they were tethered to a name already rotted by deception. I grieve not for his death, but for the recognition that the man I buried was not the man I had loved. But grief is not the end. It is the breaking before the building. My body folds, my breath shatters, my hands tremble, and then slowly, a steadiness begins to rise. Forgiveness takes root not as surrender, but as strategy. I do not forgive him to absolve him. I forgive him so I do not drown with him. I choose what to carry, not his sins, not his betrayals, but only my vow. The vow was mine, not his, and I will not let Maddox corrupt even that. I leave the mirror behind, stepping back into the night with the letter pressed to my chest. The boy's face waits in my memory, wide-eyed, vulnerable, fragile, yet resilient. And I know that everything I do must carve a path for him that is different than the one my husband took. The past does not chain me, it arms me. My scars are not shackles, they are signal fires. When I return to Pike, I do not hide the letter. I place it in his hands, watching him hesitate before unfolding it. His eyes move across the page, his jaw tightening as truth pours into him. He has spent years pretending silence was survival, but tonight truth becomes a mirror for him as it was for me. He cannot look away, and when he finishes, he does not crumble. He looks at me with something new, recognition. The letter of truth becomes not just confession, but conversion. Pike's fracture begins to mend, not in perfection, but in direction. His silence begins to turn into speech, his cowardice into courage. It is not redemption yet, but it is the first step. We plot in hushed tones, knowing the night listens as much as the men Maddox commands. The church bell at midnight will be our signal, iron ringing against the quiet like a pulse of defiance. Smoke at the livery will blind pursuit, forcing Maddox's men to scatter. And decoy routes will draw their eyes away from Ira, giving the boy a chance to vanish into safety while Maddox chases phantoms. Every plan is stitched with the threads of survival, but underneath I feel something more intimate. A bond built not on grand gestures but on presence, on two people standing at last in the same truth, even if that truth has cost us everything. But Maddox knows the town better than anyone. He knows silence as currency, fear as mortar, cruelty as fire. And when the hour edges close to midnight, he strikes not at me directly, but at the future I have chosen to protect. Smoke curls upward, not from the livery, but from the schoolhouse at the edge of town. Flames climb its wooden frame, orange teeth biting through the night, and the bell above it sways uselessly in the heat. Maddox lights it not for victory, but for spectacle. He wants to pull me out, to force me into the open, to make me watch innocence burn while I weigh my vow against survival. The letter is still in Pike's hand. The boy is still hidden in shadows. And before me the schoolhouse rises in fire, every crackling beam another reminder that cruelty always chooses an audience. The past has already betrayed me, the present is already burning, and the future waits to see what I will cut, what I will carry, and what I will finally choose to bury. I don't like ending men. I like ending the stories they use to hurt children. That thought steadies me as the fire devours the schoolhouse, the flames clawing at the sky, their crackle echoing like applause for Maddox's cruelty. The smoke is thick enough to choke memory, but I've lived too long with scars to be blinded now. I drench an old quilt in the horse trough, wrap it around my shoulders, and press low to the earth. Ash stings my lungs, sparks bite at my arms, but purpose moves me forward. Crawling through embers, I become the blade my grief has honed. Two knives flowing, one to cut, the other to clear, both moving like extensions of breath. Inside, the blaze folds itself around the rafters, and the heat roars with the sound of betrayal. Ira's small figure crouches near the window, eyes wide, trusting me not because of words, but because silence has carried my intent to him all along. Vulnerability is fragile, but tonight it becomes weapon. I lift him, push him through the shattered pane into Pike's waiting arms. For the first time, Pike does not falter. He holds the boy with the steadiness of a man rediscovering his vow. In that handoff, trust is earned, not in grand declarations, but in presence, in risking everything when it matters most. Maddox enters from the opposite side, lantern swinging, smoke curling around him like a crown. His grin is a theater mask, cruel and eager, but when we collide, the performance drops. Close quarters fighting strips away pretense. Smoke blinds the audience. My knives move not to kill, but to restrain. I cut tendons, not throats, slicing the power from his limbs without severing life. Mercy, even here, is my line. Restraint is my rebellion. I will not become what I fight. But Maddox is no fool. His blade finds my shoulder, slashing deep, hot blood mingling with smoke. Pain sears me backward into memory. The knife circle, moonlight on steel, voices laughing after discipline, and the old rule whispered like a blessing. If you must end, end clean. That mantra steadies my grip as we wrestle through falling beams. I pin him at last, the knife's tip at his eye, his breath hot with fury. The crowd outside screams at shadows, but in this moment time holds still. I could end him here, quickly, cleanly. But mercy has not yet run out. It has only changed shape. I spare him not for him, but for the reveal he cannot prevent. His end must belong to the town, not to me alone. Dragging him out of the smoke, I ring the bell. Its toll cuts through the fire's roar, summoning faces from shuttered windows, pulling them into the square whether they want to watch or not. Pike stands with Ira at his side, the boy's presence a mirror the town cannot avoid. I nail the letter, the truth about Maddox and my husband, to the post in the square. Ink becomes testimony. Silence becomes indictment. The story Maddox told about himself cracks open in the presence of every eye. For a moment, silence reigns, not the coward silence, but the kind that comes before recognition. Faces tilt, shutters swing wider, eyes widen with the weight of truth they can no longer deny. Maddox kneels bound, bloodied but alive, the myth stripped from him. And yet even stripped he grins. His teeth flash in the lamplight, and the words he breathes out slice colder than any blade. He has wired dynamite under the well, the town's lifeline, their only water, their heart. If I have made him spectacle, he has made himself a martyr in waiting. The crowd gasps, fear tumbling into panic. The bell still echoes, the letter still flutters, but Maddox's grin bends it all toward chaos. I feel the burn in my shoulder, the ache in my lungs, the weight of Ira's gaze on me, the fracture in Pike's resolve deepening into something harder. The night is not finished. Mercy has carried me this far, but now I stand at its edge. The siege is coming, long and brutal, and I must choose not only what to cut, but what to carry. Colin Maddox grins. He's wired dynamite under the well. Towns don't change at noon, they change at midnight. The fire still lingers on the air, ash drifting like snowfall across the square. The bell's echo fading into silence, heavy with recognition. All around me faces gather, faces that once hid behind shutters and shadows, now forced into the open by the fire, the letter, and Maddox's grin. I raise my blood-stained hand, shoulder torn but steady, and at last I speak the first full sentence I have given them since this began. Move when I lift my hand. The words fall heavy, a command and a vow braided into one. For years they obeyed Maddox's silences. Tonight they answer my voice. Pike shifts. Ira stares wide. The townsfolk hover between doubt and defiance. I feel the weight of their fear, the cracks of their cowardice, but I also feel the pulse of resilience waiting to surge. Towns don't transform under sunlight. They fracture in darkness when the familiar story breaks, when midnight demands a different ending. Maddox crouches near the well, his fuse lit, his eyes bright with the kind of madness that believes destruction is legacy. I do not rush him. I let the moment stretch, let his arrogance widen, then send my knife spinning through the smoke. It slices the air, strikes sparks against stone, and severs the fuse inches before it drinks the powder. The hiss dies. The town breathes again. Maddox stares, robbed of spectacle, his script faltering. I see it in his eyes. Cruelty without an audience is nothing. Gunfire erupts across storefronts, Maddox's men desperate to salvage his story. Bullets shred wood, glass falls like rain, Smoke curls in streaks of gunpowder. I take to the rooftops, my boots thudding against shingles slick with ash, turning chimneys into barricades, smoke into cover. Each leap carries me above the panic, above the noise, moving like memory through shadows I have long learned to trust. I am not here to slaughter. I am here to cut the story they have told of themselves, to turn fear into fracture, fracture into freedom. And in the center of it all, Pike finally chooses. He steps into the street, no cover, no shield, only his body and his voice. "Maddox," he roars, the name carrying more weight than the gun at his side. For years, Pike whispered warnings in corners, but now he stands under lantern light, visible, undeniable. His voice becomes the mirror they all feared, showing them not Maddox's shadow, but their own reflection. The chance to stand, to be counted. I peel Maddox's lieutenants away from him one by one, not with death, but with disablement. A knife to the tendon, a kick to the joint, a strike that drops them without ending them. Mercy becomes spectacle of its own, not weakness but strategy. The townsfolk watch as men once thought untouchable collapse, not as corpses but as reminders that cruelty can be stripped without feeding it blood. They begin to see themselves not as cowards but as people capable of a different story. One where resilience is louder than silence. One where forgiveness is stronger than fear. Above it all, the bell tolls again, not in wild alarm, but in cadence, struck by Ira's small hands. Each ring is deliberate, a rhythm carrying across rooftops and alleys, binding the town into motion. They begin to move in unison, women pulling children from doorways, men tipping wagons for barricades, neighbors dragging the wounded toward cover. The sound is not desperate, it is organized. For the first time, the town moves as one, and Maddox feels it. His grin falters, his myth frays. The story he built for years, of himself as inevitable, of them as powerless, begins to collapse under the weight of this midnight. He fights harder, wilder, desperate to reclaim a stage that no longer obeys him. But cruelty without control is chaos, and chaos cannot bind a town once it has tasted its own strength. The firefight dwindles, not in silence, but in transformation. Storefronts smoke, windows gape open, the streets littered with fragments of a night the town will never forget. Maddox, stripped of his lieutenants, stripped of his spectacle, stripped of his audience, breaks into a run. His figure streaks into the cemetery at the edge of town, where crosses tilt under moonlight and stones mark the names of those already claimed by silence. I do not call to Pike. I do not wait for Ira. This is a pursuit that belongs to me alone. Some truths cannot be carried by a crowd. Some reckonings must be spoken in whispers among graves. The night stretches long, the town trembling behind me. But the path ahead is clear. The cemetery waits, and with it the oath I buried long ago. Maddox flees to the cemetery. I follow alone. Justice is a blade that cuts both ways. The words weigh heavier than steel as I step into the cemetery. Moonlight washing across leaning stones and broken markers, the air thick with silence that feels more sacred than any chapel. Maddox waits among the graves, his breath fogging in the cold, his grin sharpened into a sneer. The town sleeps behind me, but here in this place of endings I fight not for them, not for vengeance, but for truth. We circle each other without sound, two shadows in a field of the dead. Every gravestone is witness, every mound of dirt a reminder of silence that cannot answer. My knives feel heavy, not from weight, but from memory. Every cut I've made, every choice I've carried. I move in absolute quiet, each breath counted, each step measured, as though sound itself might betray me. Maddox lunges first, blade flashing, but I do not answer with rage. I answer with patience, letting his fury trip over itself. Fire and spectacle are gone now. Only the cold rhythm of survival remains. He taunts me with my husband's sins, spitting words sharp as his steel. He reminds me of the double life revealed in the letter. The freight runs that stained my vow, the accident that was no accident at all. His voice cuts deeper than his blade, yet I do not flinch. I answer not with shouting, but with truth. He betrayed me. You killed him, and I am still here. My words are not loud, but they are final. They are not for Maddox's ears, they are for mine. The truth does not need volume, it only needs air. We clash among the stones, iron against iron, sweat stinging the wound at my shoulder. Maddox fights like a man desperate to reclaim myth, each strike wild, each motion hungry for dominance. I fight like a woman who has already bled, who has nothing left to prove but everything left to protect. My cuts are clean, measured, deliberate. At last the exchange slows to its inevitable end. His knife clatters from his grip, my blade angled at his throat, and I force him down, binding him with rope pulled from my belt. I lash him to his own marker, a stone that already bore his family's name, a reminder that even he cannot outrun the ground that waits for us all. The choice sits in my hand, heavier than any blade. Kill him here among the ashes or carry him back to the light. Vengeance would be clean, quick, final. But justice, I remind myself, cuts both ways. To end him now would make me executioner. To carry him back would make me witness. I choose daylight. By dawn, the town gathers again, this time not as spectators to cruelty, but as witnesses to justice. Sheriff Pike steps forward, no longer hiding behind silence. He shackles Maddox with hands that once trembled but now hold steady. For years his badge was a hollow ornament, but in this moment he does not wear it for authority. He holds it out to the people, returning it, giving the town back to itself. Justice is not mine alone to wield, it belongs to them. And they accept not me as savior, but themselves as one another's keepers. After the crowd disperses, I walk alone among the graves until I find the stone that bears my husband's name. The letter burns against my chest, the truth still raw, the betrayal still bitter. But I kneel anyway. From my hair I cut a lock and press it against his marker. It is not surrender, not absolution, but a ritual of release. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It means no longer letting the wound dictate every breath. I forgive him because I will not carry his lies as my own scars any longer. The sky lightens, pale fire creeping into the horizon, the last shadows stretched thin across cracked earth. Dawn spills across Cinder Gulch, and for the first time my silence feels chosen, not forced. I am not voiceless, I am measured, I am present. And as the sun breaks, the town exhales with me, stepping into a story no longer bound by Maddox's cruelty. Dawn breaks. My silence feels chosen, not forced. They remembered the woman who wouldn't speak and the town that finally did. That is how it begins. The story that lingers after fire and blood, after silence and fracture. Cinder Gulch is not the same place it was the night. Maddox bound me to a scaffold. It is not healed, not whole, but it is no longer quiet in the way it once was. The silence that used to suffocate has shifted into something different, measured, deliberate, chosen. Towns do not change with thunder. They change with murmurs that grow into vows. The schoolhouse, charred skeleton against the horizon, is the first thing rebuilt, not because wood and nails matter more than wounds, but because the children's laughter must return before anything else can. I stand with Ira as the rafters rise, beams straining upward like new bones taking shape. His small hands work rope knots under my guidance, fingers clumsy but determined. He ties loops not to bind but to save. The rope transformed from instrument of cruelty into tool of resilience. Every knot is a lesson. Survival can be remade into strength. Pain can become craft. Fear can be rewoven into skill. I do not hold public lessons. My teaching is quiet, intimate, unseen. In kitchens and back rooms, I show women how to hold a knife without trembling. Not first against flesh, but against fruit, cloth, and rope. The blade learns patience before it learns defense. I tell them without words that violence is not its first language, survival is, mercy is. A knife's truest edge is restraint, they understand. Their silence mirrors mine, not as fear, but as discipline. A community of hands grows steadier, sharper, more resilient, all in the quiet that once suffocated them. Sheriff Pike's redemption continues, steady and imperfect. He does not become a hero overnight, but step by step he reclaims what he abandoned. A plaque rises at the edge of the square, etched with the names of those who stood when silence broke. My name is not among them, I made sure of that. But Pike's is, not because he was flawless, but because he finally chose. His badge no longer hangs heavy around his neck. It rests in the town's keeping, symbol of a promise shared, not hoarded. For once, the sheriff's office is not one man's burden, but a collective vow. I travel to the rail town 2 days' ride away, carrying with me funds I cannot use, money gathered through quiet trades and quiet debts repaid. I leave it at the clinic of a second chance, a place where broken men and women patch themselves back together under the hum of lamps and the sterility of antiseptic. I leave it under no name. To sign it would be vanity. To claim it would break its purpose. Second chances do not belong to those who give them, but to those who take them. I walk out without looking back, the silence behind me filled with gratitude I never hear but know exists. The chapter of my husband closes at last. I kneel at his grave not with rage but with recognition. The letter, stained with both truth and betrayal, I fold once, then place into the soil. It returns to the earth where lies and confessions alike decay. I do not burn it. I do not keep it. I bury it as one buries the past, not erased, not forgotten, but put to rest. Before I rise, I place my palm against the cold surface of a mirror shard I had carried from the graveyard fight. For the first time, my reflection does not fracture. The glass holds steady, no shattering, no denial. Only me, whole in silence. I keep my silence still, but not as a prison. It has become discipline, chosen carefully, wielded like a blade that cuts only when needed. Yet when trust demands it, when intimacy grows, when resilience needs voice, I speak. Not often, not carelessly, but with weight. Words are no longer ripped from me, they are given, gift-like. The town learns that silence can protect, but speech can build. And trust, I have learned, is not in constant noise, but in the rare word spoken at the right time. As dusk drapes itself across Cinder Gulch, the town glows with its new story. Streetlights hum faintly, their filaments trembling but steady, reflecting off windows no longer shuttered. I walk the main street, boots brushing against the cracked sidewalks that once carried only loneliness. My shadow stretches before me, whole and unbroken. Behind me, laughter drifts from the rebuilt schoolhouse, a rhythm steadier than the old bell. The town no longer waits for a savior. It waits only for itself. And as the horizon swallows the last of the day, I carry the truth quietly, finally whole. I did not come here to be a legend. I came to end a story and write a truer one, quietly.